I stood in the pristine marble kitchen of the estate, my hands submerged in scalding dishwater, while the sound of classical music and laughter echoed from the grand ballroom 3 floors above. The distinguished guests saw me as nothing more than hired help, a faceless servant beneath their notice. What they didn't realize was that my wife owned every inch of this spectacular mansion, and I was about to deliver a lesson in humility that would cost them more than they could ever imagine. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or judged by your appearance, this story will resonate deep in your soul. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria, and 3 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams, Adrienne Wellington. To the outside world, she's known as the pharmaceutical heiress, who revolutionized cancer treatment research and built a medical empire worth billions. But to me, she's simply the brilliant, compassionate woman I met at a community health clinic, where she was volunteering her time treating underprivileged patients. She wore scrubs instead of designer clothes, and her hands were gentle as she comforted a scared child getting vaccinations. Adrienne never flaunted her extraordinary wealth. Even after our wedding, we lived modestly by her standards. While she attended board meetings and medical conferences worldwide, I found my passion working as a literacy coordinator at the downtown public library, teaching adults how to read and helping children discover the magic of books. It wasn't glamorous work, but it fulfilled my soul in ways that money never could. We both believed that true happiness came from service to others, not from material possessions. But tonight was different. Tonight marked the annual Wellington Foundation Medical Research Gala, held at our family estate. Adrienne had spent 6 months organizing this event, and every penny raised would fund groundbreaking research for rare childhood diseases. She was genuinely excited about the potential breakthroughs this funding could create. The irony wasn't lost on me that hundreds of society's elite would be dining and dancing in our home while having no clue about my identity or my connection to their hostess. That's when inspiration struck me like lightning. Call it curiosity, call it a social experiment, but I desperately wanted to witness how these privileged individuals behaved when they believed no one of importance was observing their actions. The idea both thrilled and terrified me, but I knew I had to follow through. I made a decision that would transform not just this evening, but my entire perspective on human nature. I decided to attend the gala not as Adrienne's wife, but as a member of the catering staff. I know it sounds absolutely insane, but consider this. How often do we get the opportunity to see people's authentic selves when their guard is completely down? I borrowed a crisp black serving uniform from our head housekeeper, twisted my auburn hair into a professional bun, and practiced my most unassuming, invisible expression in the mirror until I looked like any other hard-working server. Adrienne was delayed at the hospital dealing with an emergency surgery consultation, so she had no knowledge of my unconventional plan. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The transformation was remarkable and somewhat unsettling. With my hair pulled back severely, minimal makeup, and the standard uniform, I looked like I belonged behind the scenes rather than in the spotlight. I entered through the service entrance and seamlessly blended in with the actual catering team, who were too focused on their preparations to question an extra pair of hands. As the guests began arriving in their luxury vehicles, I grabbed a silver tray of champagne flutes and made my way into the ballroom. The sight was absolutely breathtaking, despite having watched the decorations being installed throughout the week. Massive crystal chandeliers illuminated the room with warm, golden light, while exotic orchids and white roses adorned every surface. The string quartet played softly in the corner, and the marble floors gleamed like mirrors beneath the guests' designer shoes. For a moment, pride swelled in my chest, knowing this magnificent space was our home. However, that pride quickly dissolved as I began moving through the crowd, offering champagne to the arriving guests. I started noticing subtle but disturbing patterns in their behavior. The way certain individuals looked straight through me as if I were completely transparent. The way they would snatch glasses from my tray without acknowledgement, continuing their conversations as though I were nothing more than a moving furniture piece. The dismissive gestures, the complete lack of basic courtesy, the assumption that I was somehow less deserving of basic human recognition. "Excuse me, server," called out a woman draped in emerald silk and dripping with diamonds. Her name was Vivienne. and I recognized her from the society magazines as the wife of a prominent real estate mogul. "This champagne is practically flat. Can't your people tell the difference between quality and garbage?" Her tone was sharp enough to cut glass, and her eyes held the kind of disdain usually reserved for something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. I smiled politely and offered my sincere apologies, promising to bring her a fresh glass immediately. She rolled her eyes dramatically and turned back to her companion, dismissing me with a wave of her jeweled hand as if I were an annoying insect. I swallowed my pride and walked away, reminding myself that this treatment was exactly what I had hoped to observe and document. But I had no idea that the real performance was just beginning to unfold. Enter Cordelia Ashworth, the event coordinator and self-appointed empress of the charity circuit. She was an imposing figure in her late 50s, towering over most people in her gold lame gown that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. She possessed this particular way of looking at people that made you feel approximately 2 inches tall, and unfortunately for me, she had decided to make me her primary target for the evening. "You there," she commanded, pointing one perfectly manicured finger in my direction like a weapon. "What's your name, and who trained you for this event?" Her voice carried across the room with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Victoria," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional despite the condescending tone. "Well, Victoria, I certainly hope you're more competent than the rest of this amateur staff. Do you see how slowly these hors d'oeuvres are being distributed? It's absolutely unacceptable for an event of this caliber. This is supposed to be a sophisticated gathering, not some neighborhood block party." Her criticism was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, designed to cut deep and leave lasting wounds. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I nodded respectfully and assured her that I would do everything in my power to meet her expectations. But Cordelia was far from finished with her performance. For the next 2 hours, she managed to find fault with every single thing I did. The angle at which I held my serving tray, the speed of my movement through the crowd, the way I approached guests, even the way I stood when I wasn't actively serving. It became crystal clear that she derived genuine pleasure from having someone to belittle and control. The other guests seemed to take their behavioral cues directly from Cordelia's treatment of the staff. If she could speak to us with such obvious disdain, then it must be socially acceptable behavior among their circle. I watched in fascination and horror as perfectly educated, supposedly refined individuals transformed into entitled bullies the moment they thought no one of importance was paying attention to their actions. "This salmon is overcooked," complained a distinguished gentleman in an impeccably tailored tuxedo. "Don't you people understand the difference between properly prepared fish and rubber? I'm not donating my hard-earned money to eat substandard food." I wanted to remind him that he wasn't actually paying for anything, that this was a charitable event where his donation went to medical research, but I maintained my composure and offered to bring him an alternative selection. As the evening progressed relentlessly, the treatment became increasingly degrading and personal. Guests would interrupt me mid-sentence when I was attempting to serve them or answer their questions. They made jokes about the intelligence level of service workers, assuming we couldn't comprehend their sophisticated humor. Some even made casual comments about how people like us should feel grateful for the opportunity to work in such an elegant environment, as if serving them was somehow a privilege we should treasure. The absolute breaking point arrived when one of the servers called in sick at the last possible minute, leaving the catering team scrambling to cover all the necessary responsibilities. Cordelia was absolutely furious about this development, and she needed someone to take over the kitchen duties immediately. Can you guess who she selected for this honor? "Victoria," she announced with obvious satisfaction. "You're going to handle the dishwashing station. We're severely understaffed, and someone needs to keep the kitchen operation running smoothly throughout the remainder of the evening." She delivered this command as if she were bestowing a great honor upon me. I stared at her for a long moment, processing the complete absurdity of what she was demanding. Here I stood in my own home, being ordered to wash dishes by a woman who had no idea she was standing in my ballroom, treating me like disposable help in the house that bore my family name on the deed. "I was hired specifically to serve guests," I said carefully. testing the waters, not to work in the kitchen washing dishes. Cordelia's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits, and her voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Listen carefully, sweetheart. You will do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it. This is a professional event with serious money involved, and I absolutely will not tolerate some part-time server questioning my authority or my decisions. Now get yourself to that kitchen and start cleaning up, or you can pack your things and find yourself another job. Do I make myself perfectly clear? The entire ballroom fell into an uncomfortable silence around us. Other guests had stopped their conversations to watch this public confrontation unfold. I could feel dozens of eyes focused on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this humiliation. Some faces showed amusement at the spectacle, others displayed discomfort, but not a single person stepped forward to intervene or defend me. The silence spoke volumes about their collective character. I took a deep, steadying breath and walked toward the kitchen, not because I felt intimidated or powerless, but because I wanted to see exactly how far this cruelty would extend. I needed to witness the complete depths of their callousness when they believed there would be absolutely no consequences for their behavior. The kitchen was in complete chaos. Dishes were stacked high in every available sink, and the industrial dishwasher was running continuously to keep up with the demand. I rolled up my sleeves and began the tedious work, my hands quickly becoming raw and painful from the scalding water and harsh chemical soap. Through the service window I could observe the guests laughing, dancing, and celebrating, completely oblivious to the hard work being performed behind the scenes to make their evening magical and memorable. But Cordelia wasn't finished demonstrating her power over me. She continued making regular trips to the kitchen, finding new and creative ways to assert her dominance and superiority. She criticized my dishwashing technique with the precision of a military drill sergeant, complained endlessly about the pace of service, and made increasingly personal comments about my supposed inability to handle real work or contribute meaningfully to society. Her words were designed to strip away every ounce of dignity and self-worth. You know, she said during one particularly venomous visit to the kitchen, I've been organizing elite events like this for over 25 years. I can identify the troublemakers and incompetent workers from across the room. You clearly have serious attitude problems, and that kind of defiance simply will not work in this industry. People like you need to learn your place and accept it gracefully. I continued methodically washing the endless stream of expensive china and crystal, letting her toxic words flow over me like the soapy dishwater. She had absolutely no idea that she was berating the woman who owned this magnificent estate, who had personally approved every single detail of this lavish event, who could have her permanently banned from every high society function in the entire state with just one strategic phone call. The irony was both infuriating and darkly amusing. But the ultimate test of my patience and self-control arrived when Vivienne, the woman in the emerald silk dress, decided to join Cordelia in the kitchen. She was visibly intoxicated and feeling particularly bold and cruel in her current state. "Oh, this is absolutely priceless," she laughed with genuine malice, gesturing at me, scrubbing plates with raw, reddened hands. "Look at our little princess server, demoted to dish duty like a common scullery maid. I bet when you woke up this morning, you never imagined you'd end your day elbow-deep in dirty dishwater, serving your betters." I looked up from the sink, water dripping from my hands, and met her gaze directly. "Actually, I find honest work quite fulfilling and meaningful, regardless of what form it takes." Vivienne's perfectly made-up face twisted into an ugly sneer of contempt. "Honest work? Is that seriously what you're calling this pathetic display? Sweetheart, this isn't honest work or meaningful contribution. This is what desperate people do when they have absolutely no other viable options available to them. This is what people resort to when they lack the intelligence, education, or natural beauty to accomplish anything else worthwhile in their miserable lives." Her words struck me like physical blows, not because they wounded me personally, but because I suddenly realized with crystal clarity that she genuinely believed every poisonous word she was speaking. She truly thought that a person's fundamental worth and value as a human being was determined solely by their job title, bank account balance, or social status. The depth of her ignorance and cruelty was genuinely breathtaking. "You want to know what I really think about your situation? Vivienne continued, emboldened by my stunned silence and apparent vulnerability. I think you're probably some community college dropout who couldn't hack it in the real world, where intelligence and competence actually matter. I bet you're living paycheck to paycheck in some cramped studio apartment, probably sharing it with 3 roommates just to afford the rent. People like you are absolutely everywhere. A dime a dozen with no real ambition, no drive, no vision for anything better. This kitchen job is probably the pinnacle of your entire career trajectory. Cordelia nodded enthusiastically in agreement, clearly enjoying this public humiliation session. She's absolutely correct in her assessment. I've witnessed hundreds of young women exactly like you come and go over the years. No genuine ambition, no work ethic, no realistic prospects for improvement or advancement. This catering position is probably the best employment opportunity you'll ever be offered in your entire lifetime. You should be grateful we're even giving you this chance to prove your worth. I stood there motionless, my hands still dripping with greasy dishwater, watching these 2 privileged women tear apart the character and prospects of someone they knew absolutely nothing about. In that moment, I made a life-changing decision. I was completely finished with this cruel social experiment. I was done being treated like worthless garbage in my own beautiful home. I was done witnessing these people reveal the absolute ugliest aspects of their true nature, without any consequences whatsoever. But before I could formulate any response or reveal my true identity, I heard the most wonderful, familiar voice calling from the direction of the ballroom entrance. "Excuse me, has anyone seen my wife Victoria? I'm looking for Victoria Wellington, and I was told she might be here somewhere." My heart began racing with anticipation and relief. Adrienne had finally arrived from the hospital. Cordelia and Vivienne exchanged bewildered, confused glances. They had absolutely no comprehension of what was happening, but they could definitely sense that the entire dynamic was about to shift dramatically in ways they couldn't control or predict. "Your wife?" Cordelia called out in confusion, walking quickly toward the ballroom with obvious concern in her voice. "Ma'am, I honestly don't know what you're referring to. There's no one here tonight by that name except for one of our catering servers, and she's currently handling kitchen duties." I heard Adrienne's distinctive footsteps approaching the kitchen area, and I knew with absolute certainty that this elaborate charade was about to reach its explosive conclusion. I slowly dried my hands on the nearest kitchen towel and turned to face Cordelia and Vivienne, who were looking increasingly confused and apprehensive by the second. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and filled with quiet confidence, "there is definitely someone here tonight by that name." Adrienne appeared in the kitchen doorway, her elegant evening gown a stark contrast to the industrial kitchen environment. Her concerned eyes immediately found mine across the room, taking in my servant's uniform and the obvious signs of manual labor on my hands. For several long moments, she didn't fully comprehend what she was witnessing. "Victoria," she said, her voice filled with genuine worry and confusion, "what are you doing working in the kitchen? Why are you dressed like a member of the catering staff? Are you feeling all right, darling?" I smiled lovingly at my wife, this brilliant woman who had dedicated her entire life to healing others and making the world a better place, who still looked at me like I was the most precious thing in her universe despite my disheveled appearance. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied warmly. I was just getting to know our distinguished guests a little better, observing how they treat people they consider beneath their social status. The realization hit Adrienne like a bolt of lightning. Her expression rapidly shifted from confusion to understanding to barely controlled fury as she processed exactly what had been happening. She looked directly at Cordelia and Vivienne, who were standing frozen in the kitchen doorway like deer caught in headlights. "Let me make sure I understand this situation correctly," Adrienne said, her voice dangerously quiet and controlled. "You've had my wife washing dishes in our own kitchen, in our own home, while treating her like disposable hired help?" Cordelia's face went completely white, with shock and growing panic. "Your wife? But that's absolutely impossible. She's just a server, part of the temporary catering staff we hired for tonight's event. There must be some terrible misunderstanding here." "No misunderstanding at all," Adrienne replied firmly, stepping closer to me and gently taking my work-reddened hands in her soft ones. "This is Victoria Wellington, my wife of 3 years and the co-owner of this entire estate." She's also one of the most compassionate, intelligent, and remarkable women you'll ever have the privilege to meet, though I suspect you've already missed that opportunity completely. The silence in the kitchen was absolutely deafening. Vivienne's face had transformed from flushed red to a sickly pale green, and Cordelia looked as though she might collapse from shock at any moment. I could hear the murmur of conversation gradually dying down in the ballroom as other guests began sensing that something monumentally significant was unfolding. Adrienne turned to address the growing crowd of curious onlookers gathering in the doorway. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you all to meet my beloved wife, Victoria. She made the fascinating decision to experience tonight's charity event from a completely different perspective, working alongside our catering staff to observe how our esteemed guests would treat someone they perceived as their social inferior. Unfortunately, I think we've all learned some very uncomfortable truths about ourselves tonight." The crowd parted respectfully as Adrienne led me into the ballroom, never releasing my hands. I could see the recognition dawning on face after face throughout the room. The woman they had ignored, dismissed, insulted, and humiliated was actually the lady of the house, the co-hostess of their elegant charity event. Victoria wanted to witness firsthand how our guests would treat someone they considered beneath their social standing. Adrienne continued, her clear voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "I'm deeply disappointed to report that many of you failed this basic test of human decency quite spectacularly." Cordelia stumbled forward desperately, her face a mask of panic and regret. "Mrs. Wellington, I had absolutely no idea who she was. If I had known her true identity, I would never have assigned her to kitchen duties. I was simply trying to keep the event running smoothly and professionally. Please understand that this was all just a terrible mix-up." "Exactly my point, Cordelia," I said, finally finding my voice and my power again. "You treated me with contempt and cruelty because you believed I was just a server. But here's the fundamental truth you're missing. I was just a server tonight. The only difference between me and the woman who would have been washing those dishes in my place is that I had the luxury of choice in this situation." Vivienne attempted to quietly disappear into the crowd, but Adrienne's authoritative voice stopped her escape attempt immediately. "Vivienne, I believe you had some particularly harsh things to say about people like my wife tonight. Something about community college dropouts and people without ambition or prospects for advancement." The shame and embarrassment on Vivienne's face was almost painful to witness, but I wasn't finished delivering this necessary lesson. "For the record," Adrienne continued with surgical precision, "Victoria has a doctorate in education from Princeton University, and she chooses to work at the public library because she believes passionately in literacy and equal access to education for all members of our community, regardless of their economic background." The ripple effect throughout the ballroom was immediate and devastating. Other guests who had been rude or dismissive to me throughout the evening began to panic visibly, suddenly realizing that their cruel behavior might have serious, lasting consequences they had never considered. "Regarding that real estate development project your husband has been negotiating with Wellington Enterprises," Adrienne said directly to Vivienne, "consider it permanently canceled. We prefer to conduct business exclusively with people who share our fundamental values about human dignity and respect." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.